So Brazil has a 200 million population, a little bit more, but let's think of the big number of 200 million. And out of that, at around 50% are Black people. So we are the biggest Black population in a country outside Africa. So when I tell you these numbers, when I give you this data, it's really important that you imagine them in racial terms. So and not just as a 50% account, because this would be kind of natural if you have like 100 deaths in a city, you would expect 50 to be Black. But the truth is that you have 70% more chance to die from COVID 19 in Brazil if you are Black than if you are white. So nowadays, just like in many cities and many states there in the United States, Black people are paying more and more for this crisis than any other population. Um, the same data can also refer to the native Brazilian people, which is also what's behind the the extreme situation of the crisis in the north part of Brazil, which is partly native Brazilian and partly Black people living there. Um, so we've been discussing how much the COVID 19 exposed and brought to surface what the government after government, decade after decade, the bourgeois intellectuals, the bourgeois governments, the capitalists in Brazil say there is no racism, that we're a country which overcame racism by giving each race that composes our population their specific role in society. So everybody has a role. Everybody has every population, every race in Brazil has their right to a part, to their own part of what they built here. And this is a lie, because slaves, African slaves, built this country. And nowadays, the consequences are that the Black people are the people who are less paid, who live poorly, and these are the conditions that create the numbers we see nowadays. We heard some reporters, some scientists going back to the 18th century and trying to find a scientific or genetical explanation for the Black people being the ones who died the most from COVID 19. But we know that it's not genetics, it's capitalism. These are people who receive, for example, a Black woman in Brazil. Is paid 60% less than a white man in the same job. A black guy receives from 30 to 40% less than a white man in the same position, in the same job, with the same level of education. Also, Black people are the ones who depend the most on the public health system, a health system that year after year has had its budget cut by the government in order to force people to run after the private health system. So we're facing a situation right now in which we have two health systems, one for the rich, one for the ones who can pay, where you can have your test done, where you can have a mask given by your doctor, by the nurses, a hospital that you can be hospitalized and treated in intensive care units because you can pay for them, and another health system that is very, very close, if not over, its attendance and hospitalization limits. And this is the health system for the Black people. So the government prefers having these people dying from the disease, having these people in common graves, than actually spending more money and giving more budget to the public health system, because in the end they want to have a very thin public budget in order to pay a public debt that goes straight to international banks. Bolsonaro is the author of many racist statements. He once said that the Afro-Brazilian population wasn't even useful for reproduction. So, but this guy doesn't come out of the blue, you know. He became the president because he was supported by a part of the capitalists in Brazil and out of Brazil also, just like Trump, just like all this new right politics, this new right wing politics, these outsiders. They're being supported by a class who wants them there. And here in Brazil, since the beginning of the crisis, the 2008 crisis, they're attempting to reinforce racism in order to control more the population, because the Black people have a history of struggle in our country. We haven't been passive in our history. So this is why Bolsonaro comes trying to imply a lot of more racism in the national ideology. This is what caused Mestre Moa assassination. Mestre Moa was a capoeira master here in Brazil. And this is also what explains the death, the killing of Marielle Franco, even before the election of Bolsonaro, from the hands of Brazilian state, of course. This whole ideological scenario that I'm trying to trace to you brings us to a situation now in which, together to all this new configuration of racism in Brazil, we also have the police officers and the military forces feeling empowered in front of the crisis to be the ones who control, to be the ones who guarantee the quarantine. And some bizarre, disgusting situations happened lately. One of them was the case of a woman, an elderly woman. She was 62 years old. She was in the hospital in Rio Grande do Sul, a south state in Brazil. She was with her husband. They went to the hospital looking for help because he had the symptoms for coronavirus. And they started demanding a doctor. They were there for too long. The man wasn't feeling well. So the security officers of the hospital started beating him up because they said he stole a cell phone, you know. The woman died from seeing her husband being beaten that way. Another situation was last week in Rio de Janeiro. One of the governors that is opposition to Bolsonaro, his name is Witzel. He ordered his police to enter a slum called Morro do Alemão, and there the police made 20 deaths. So this is unacceptable. You know, people are now facing. They're now trying to stay alive. They're now facing the fear of death, a collective fear of death. And in the middle of this situation, we're seeing people being killed intentionally by the state, a state that should be protecting them from dying, and they're not. We've been seeing a lot of campaigns and social network from people saying hashtag stay home, hashtag be healthy. And I just would like to mention a case of a boy, a 14-year-old boy, which is a boy who was at home. He was doing his quarantine, and the police entered his house to kill him, also in Rio de Janeiro. So there's no such thing of being protected and being healthy in the hands of capitalist governments like the ones we have here in Brazil, we have there in the United States and everywhere in the world. They're trying to put in action measures to protect their profits, to protect the economy, and not to protect the working class lives and the Black people's lives and the native Brazilian people lives. So we as Esquerda Diário here, as part of this international network of of Esquerda Diário, Left Voice, um, we're also taking part in this struggle with putting in action a platform defending that people who are working nowadays, who are essential workers, have the right to be tested and also have the right to receive the proper PPE for their work. We're also demanding that people who are not essential workers, that people who Bolsonaro and many governors want to return to work to make the economy move again. We want these people not to be forced to go to work. We want them to be released with their pays, with their salaries protected, and also with no layoffs. So capitalists say they're dealing with COVID as if we were in a war, but that's not true. All previous centuries, when they promoted their wars, the wars that they threw us to die, they reconverted industries to produce bombs, to produce guns, and now they're not doing anything with the industries they have to produce what's necessary to face this crisis. So we're also defending here the reconversion of all industries with all the conditions for the workers to work safely. And many workers we discuss every day say, okay, I would go to work if it was to help dealing and defeating this virus. So we know that our class can do a lot if we have the control of the situation. There are many pages of our history telling how much Black people never stopped fighting against slavery and for freedom, and how much we combated for our rights. Not only here in Brazil, but in the United States, all through Latin America. So Esquerda Diário wants to be part of this tradition. And even though it doesn't seem possible, even though we look to our future and it seems destroyed, some people are saying that it's the end of times. We know it isn't. You know, Black people in the 18th century and 17th century, they looked to their future and there was only slavery ahead. So they dared, dreaming further and demanding a different life and demanding a different future. And Esquerda Diário wants to be part of this tradition. That's why we are now struggling for a different perspective, a perspective in which our class is not determined to die, in which we can fight for our rights and we can fight for a different perspective of future. That's why we want Esquerda Diário to be part of this tradition that wants capitalists to pay for this crisis.